Hey there, I'm Ant, and this is my session on generative AI. Thanks for joining. So to give you an idea of what we're going to go through in this video, really what I'm going to do is give you an overview, really high level on Midjourney as well as ChatGPT. And then really most of the session is going to focus on a playground where we take some of the techniques that I'm talking about and implementing them directly into the tools. I think ultimately, what should you be looking to get out of this? Well, really, this is more about understanding prompting than creating epic art. What I mean by that is I'm not going to show you how to be a Midjourney expert. More, I want to teach you how to use ChatGPT and understand what's happening as you're adjusting your prompts. Well, I'll show you various frameworks so that you can kind of get a sense of how you can manipulate ChatGPT to get outputs you want. And hopefully this is just really a visual way for you to understand a bit better what's going on as you change the various different frameworks that you use. But most importantly, I hope you spend this time just having fun, using a machine to do something else that's kind of creative and perhaps not something that you would have originally thought of. So to start, really, what are we looking at? Well, first up, we're going to look at Midjourney. Midjourney is a generative AI program that's designed to take an input of text and generate an image. You can use this for a variety of purposes, kind of like doing marketing, product design, but mostly it's creative ideation because a lot of the corpus of data that they used is based on generated images and not necessarily copyrighted marketing type material. It can do various different styles, so we're looking right the way from photorealistic to sketches to kind of everything in between. And I think what's important to understand or remember about Midjourney is that it uses GPT-3. So that means that its semantic understanding of words that you prompt it with would be a little bit less powerful than something like a GPT-4 based model like we have with ChatGPT-4. And I guess really, if you haven't seen it already, I would really encourage you to go to the Midjourney community feed, because that really gives you an indication of what people are doing with Midjourney, and I found it as a really interesting source of inspiration that kind of helped me kickstart this whole process. So then what's ChatGPT-4? Well, ChatGPT-4 is a large language model developed by OpenAI. This has been trained on a massive amount of data and has really been coded to do a variety of things. This is really a general purpose large language model. And I'm not really going to get into the specifics behind what's powering ChatGPT or ChatGPT-4, but what I think is really important to distinguish here is ChatGPT-4's better semantic understanding of language and really its ability to further extend kind of outputs based on what you're giving it. And so that really got me thinking, and the reason for this course was, well, since Midjourney is running a GPT-3 model, and I have access to a GPT-4 model, is there a way that I can kind of bolt on top my GPT-4 model on top of the GPT-3 model? So really the idea behind here is, can I kind of amplify my creativity? So give something like ChatGPT a prompt of words and use it to help me give a better set of words to Midjourney so that I can kind of get the creative output that I'm ultimately wanting. So it's really about amplifying creativity. At the same time, I'm really interested to have a better enhanced user interaction. I'm not really creative, and you'll probably see throughout this demo, I'm not the biggest artsy sort of person. So any way that I can kind of use technology to help empower or superpower my creative abilities really kind of speaks volumes to me. And again, this is for fun, right? Hopefully you're watching this on the internet, you got a good cup of coffee, and you're just going to focus on really just building something in a very lightweight and easy way. And on that, I should probably mention, we're not really going to be doing any coding. We'll just be using the native UI for ChatGPT as well as Midjourney. But you probably want to stop the video at this point if you haven't set up ChatGPT or Midjourney. And I guess just as a bit of by way of intro, I'm now on the 5th of June, 2023. And so Midjourney is only available via Discord bot. So there's a fair amount of setup. It's fairly easy to set up, but probably spend about 5 or 10 minutes setting up. All right, so the theme for this whole video is really around let's dream. And I guess really actually it's more, let's say ChatGPT dream, but you kind of get the drift. So in order to make this an effective session, we're going to have a worksheet that we'll follow along with. So if you want, snap this on your smartphone. There's the URL, and I'll leave the URL in the comments as well. But the worksheet is basically going to be our step-by-step guide that we'll all go through together. All right, so you're going to need both this as well as ChatGPT and Midjourney to kind of get the most from the session. Okay, so now really onto the fun stuff. So for the session, I'm really going to need you to pick up 3 to 5 words that we're going to use for you as a baseline to create your images. So in this example, you'll notice in the worksheet that I use cute samurai cat, but realistically, you can use any 3 words that you want. And if you're a little bit stuck, you can even use something like Bard to simply say, give me 3 unrelated words. I would recommend using a noun, an adjective in a place, but honestly, you can use whatever you want. That's the whole point. Let's dream. Let's do something creative. ChatGPT as well as Midjourney do support other languages, although I really would recommend sticking to English just because the software is mostly tuned towards the English language set. In terms of other guidelines, ideally keep it within community standards. Both ChatGPT and Midjourney do have a group of moderators, so be a little bit logical or sensible when you're creating your various different prompts. And like I said, we're going to use this throughout the session or throughout the videos. The idea behind it is we really want to keep the baseline input consistent. And the theory behind that is if it's always consistent, you can then really see the difference from the various different ways that we modify prompting, right? Because that's what we're here for. We're here for prompting, not to see the power of Midjourney necessarily. And so with that, let's get on and do our first session. And so, like I said, we want a baseline, right? So what we'll do is we can either come over to my example, and just so you understand how to use the worksheet, anything in green is the prompts that we want to copy. So we'll right-click and copy. And what you'll notice in purple is the output from ChatGPT. So I've just done that to make the session a little bit easier for us to kind of follow along together. But in reality, you just need to copy paste anything in the green under the various different techniques that are interesting for you. So what we'll do is we'll take our prompt, as I mentioned, and we'll copy it. We're then going to go across to Midjourney. So you'll see here I kind of have Midjourney already set up. And the way we do it is we just go /imagine and simply put in our prompt. So like I said, in this instance, we just want to give it our baseline keywords. We want to see out the box, what does Midjourney do? And from there, we can start to make improvements and iterations. So what you'll notice is this kind of works through a chat interface. I'm not going to spend time for the rest of the session coming back here. I have all my images pre-baked. But what you'll notice is this sends off a job to Midjourney, and Midjourney starts to process your request. When it's completed, you'll see you're able to select or see the 4 images. If you select Open in Browser, it'll actually take you to like a cached, higher res version of your images. And if there's a particular version you like, you can go back to the Midjourney bot, and you can tell it that you'd like to upscale one of the 4 images or do a variation around them. There's plenty of videos on this, so I'm not going to go into that. Right, so let's jump back into it. Hopefully by now, your Midjourney prompt has rendered. And really, what do we want to notice here? Well, odds are it's a very literal interpretation of the keyword you provided. The style is probably going to be fairly random in the sense that you might have various different styles across your 4 different images. It also may look really good out the box, right? Depending on the keywords you've chosen, there might be a very good set of symmetry or connection between the words, and Midjourney is able to create something really beautiful. On the other side, it might also look really trippy, You know, if you've got a weird set of keywords and it's trying to figure out how to put together a spaceship and a cup of coffee, you know, you might end up with a coffee mug that looks like a spaceship. So expect the machine to think a little bit weird as well. And really, why do these turn out like that? Well, again, it's only referencing back on similar examples that Midjourney's been trained on, right? At the same time, we're not really providing any rails or guidelines to tell it how to think or how to prompt or execute on our prompt. And then lastly, ChatGPT 3. A limitation there is it has less semantic understanding of words than something more powerful like GPT-4. And so it's almost lazy in a sense that it's not able to comprehend or add as much value as we would expect from some of these later iterated LLM models. All right, so here we can see our output from Midjourney. You'll see it's fairly literal. It's got a lot of different examples. Here we have like kind of 2 cartoon cats. Here we have 2 more photorealistic cats. The tie into being a samurai is there, not fully there, but we kind of get a sense for it. So I think overall this is a great first attempt, and I would say certainly closer to that being an on-point set of images versus none. But you know, let's see if we can do better. So we're really going to look at this from 3 different ways. 2 of them are really the way most people are looking at and referring to prompt engineering. The other one is something that I guess came as a result of me kind of tinkering and wondering if something like this is even possible. So these are not specific to ChatGPT. These can really be used anywhere where you're providing some sort of prompt to a large language model. It just happens we're going to use ChatGPT, but honestly, this could be in any other piece of software or model that you're looking at running. So what are the 3 different ways that we'll talk about? As I mentioned, the first 2, zero shot and few shot, are well documented as ways to really improve the outputs coming from your LLMs. Function is a bit of a unique one where we're going to try to put a coding layer on top of our LLM. So let's look at it. Zero shot. Well, really zero shot is the easiest way to start improving the output of your response from an LLM. It does have a high degree of variance. And why it has a high degree of variance is LLMs, by their very nature, are non-deterministic. What we mean by that is if you give it the same prompt, cute samurai cat, if I give it 5 times, I'm going to get 5 very different outputs. That's pretty unusual because most of the time we're trying to get something that's more deterministic. When I ask Google for a certain set of search results, it more or less consistently returns the same set of results. The order might change, but that's the Google engineers trying to help me find the most useful link. But when we really look at, how does it surface relevancy, most of that is pretty deterministic. And we just don't have that property with LLMs because of the way that they work. So how we kind of cater or work to fix that is we use these methods. So like I said, zero shot really is the easiest way. And it's the way that you see a lot of people creating guides online today. So that is ChatGPT, you are a teacher. You are a NASA scientist. You're an award-winning physicist. And you then prompt it with your question. We're not really giving it any guidance on how we want an output, but we are giving a context on what we're expecting or the domain that we're really wanting it to assess. Few shot takes us a little bit further. And really, I'd kind of put this more as a medium sort of effort. And really what we're looking to do here is further refine how we're getting an output from these LLMs. And so generally what you're going to say is, ChatGPT, you're an X. Here are some examples of what I want you to give back as an output. And then you'll start engaging with it. So if you kind of think about it in a classic machine learning sort of way, we are effectively looking at fitting the model. However, I want to kind of caveat that because that's not the sort of fitting that we think about classically, right? We're not looking at huge data sets to fit this. We're really looking at like just a few examples, really well curated. And that's normally enough to power the LLMs around an output that we're looking for. So those two, as I mentioned, are really the true way of doing this. The third way was my hacky way of kind of assessing, could we kind of put like a coding language to sit on top of ChatGPT? So really trying to see, is there a way that I could always give it some kind of input and then almost always guarantee that I'll get a consistent looking output every time? I'll leave it for the end of the video for you to see if we can do that, but that's really what I'm going to walk you through for the rest of the session. So let's get started. Let's start playing. So first up, what we're going to do is we're just going to go straight into our worksheet, and we'll see here, zero-shot prompt. I've kind of just given you a little bit of a rundown of what's in my head and what we're going to try to do under those various sectors. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy our prompt. We're going to go over to ChatGPT. Again, in my case, I have paid for premium, so I'm going to go for ChatGPT 4. We don't need any of the plugins. We can just go straight for default. And we're going to pop this right on in. For all the models, we've kind of given this instruction to kind of say, ready to dream. So that's when we know what we're looking for. Again, we're just going to copy. You can copy my prompt, or again, paste your prompt directly in. And we're going to hit enter. And what you'll see, ChatGPT does a really good job, right? I mean, the output it gives us is really good. It's very descriptive, reads a bit more like a novel than perhaps like just a pure image description, but you really do paint a good mental picture of what's happening here. However, that's not really how Midjourney works, right? Again, I'm not going to show you this, but if you kind of copy paste your response into Midjourney, you're going to see it's not really exactly what you're looking for. And the reason for that is, again, Midjourney is using a less sophisticated sort of model here. And if you read the docs on Midjourney, they do want more words, but really they're looking for keywords, not sentences, right? So the kind of trick here is we're trying to find a way that we can have enough linkage in the language that it makes sense, and then also kind of more or less keyword stuff it with really interesting concepts to help create the picture that we want. And the question is, well, how do we kind of get ChatGPT to give us what we're looking for? How do we improve zero-shot prompting outside of the sort of like generic formula here? And the good news is fairly easily, right? So what you'll notice is just a rejig in the previous prompt that I'd used. So in this case, you'll see here, we've added keywords that say focus on specific details about the subject. Keywords on the artistic medium, 30 words or less. And really, that's it. That's more or less the only set of prompts you really need to give Midjourney. And that's fine. That you need to give ChatGPT. So what you'll see here, again, this is our prompt. Just go ahead. I recommend every time we do a new prompt, do a new chat box within ChatGPT, just because it'll make it easier for you to kind of go back and play with this a bit more. So if you're not already, there's a little edit button. So I kind of just do this. This is like zero shot, and we'll do a new chat, put in my new prompt, and then I'll call that zero shot dash improved, or whatever it is that I'm looking to do. That just helps me with keep the order in line and also make sure that the content's landing in the right way for me. So, once we do put in our response, again, of a cute samurai cat, what you'll see here is we actually get a better response, right? It's still not totally within line of 30 words. That's a known thing with LLMs. They get close to, but not exactly, and that's fine. Maybe just decrease your word limit if you have a hard word limit. But you can see here, look at that. It's a lot more focused on the subject. We get a little bit of a notion for a backdrop here. We're talking a little bit about the action, it's mid-leap. And then just a little bit around textures, so it's softer, harsh metals, as well as maybe a bit of a feeling, right? This feeling of ferocity. And so what does that sort of look like? Well, yeah, I think this is really well improved. And what's interesting to notice here is you can start to see, even now with these fairly limited constraints, we've actually bound Midjourney a bit more too, right? So ChatGPT introduced this notion of a background where the generic prompt didn't have that. So now we've got cherry blossoms coming through. Awesome. There seems to be a bit more consistency in the look of our cats and their samurai nature. So again, while the artistic representation might not appeal to you, hopefully what you're seeing here is, well, actually there's some really good improvements by adding a relatively small amount of tweaks to the model. But the question is, can we do better? And the answer is, of course we can. We can always do better. And that really is then what brings us into FewShot, right? So as I mentioned earlier, FewShot is really going to take the improvements that we've made on ZeroShot and then add a few examples so that we really try and tune or tweak what we're getting as an output from ChatGPT. So I think some important things to note. Again, we're not talking classic machine learning model fitting. And if you're not aware, usually that requires a highly curated data set. Generally, the more data, the better your machine learning models will turn out. But for LLMs, I mean, we're talking like examples in the 3 to 5s, not in the thousands or hundreds of thousands, right? So don't get discouraged when I say examples. Having said that, examples are also really directional, right? So just because I give it a set of examples, it might not necessarily flow through on that exact sort of output. And so there is a bit of a balance that you'll play. And I guess the question then is like, well, where do I find these examples, right? And it does need a bit of curation. So, you can use something like ChatGPT or Bard to create these examples. And I'm not quite done with that, but I will have a session on that later. Or you could use the Midjourney gallery. So I gave a shout out to this earlier in the presentation, but Midjourney has this community feed where you can just see some of the most trending bits of art that various people are creating on Midjourney. And if something really appeals to you, you can kind of click here on the dropdown, copy. Now there's two options. The full command is going to give you the prompt as well as some modifications to Midjourney's parameters. We're not going to touch that for the session. So really what we look at is just the prompt. And the prompt gives us just some plain text example. So in this example here, you'll see that it's Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse in the style of John Foster, dark aquamarine and red, and so on and so on. So we just kind of use those as the base template for what we like. And what's really cool is you could kind of curate. And let's say you only want to focus on portraits, then just get examples of portraits and feed that in as your example. So in our case, I just curated just the top 5 in the day that I happened to create this. And so again, go ahead and copy this over into ChatGPT. And one thing I want you to notice is this kind of use here of examples. So at least for ChatGPT, and I suspect most LLMs, they don't really have a specific syntax that they want for you to kind of highlight categories or the way that you're kind of working on the model. What you do need to do, though, is just be consistent. So what you'll see here is I've said below I have shared some examples. And my examples are in square brackets. Note that, at least in ChatGPT's case, it doesn't support rich text formatting. So when we paste this, it's just all words. So that's why we have to kind of use brackets, square, curly, chevrons, whatever you want to use. Just make sure it's something that allows you to kind of highlight categories or buckets. So you see here, examples, examples. And then I curate. Example 1, enter whatever the example is, end with a semicolon. Example 2, what it is, end with a semicolon. You don't necessarily have to be as explicit in terms of the structure here, but what I have found is the more consistent you are, the easier it is for ChatGPT or an LLM in general to kind of understand the various components of your prompt, right? So what you're seeing there is a slightly better output than what you've seen with Zero Shot. The question is, can we get this perhaps a little bit better? And as it happened, I also used Bard to help me create some of these examples. That's why the screenshot's here. And what was really interesting was Bard also gave me this idea of, well, why don't you add tips, right? So it gave me those 10 prompts and then also said, and here's 4 tips that you can use to create better images. So what I kind of did here under basic and guidance was I was like, all right, great. So now we have tips and examples. And you'll notice here, tips, again, could be square, could have used round brackets just as easily. And if you want, modify the prompt before you put it into ChatGPT to see what that looks like. But here, again, you'll see I now gave it 4 tips. Plus, to save you a bit of work, I went and pulled out 21 different examples of various different trending images. So you'll see there everything from, images of famous people to fictional characters from Chinese novels to portraits of people to, just rainbow cakes or very interesting landscapes or whatever it may be. So I did the work for you and you can assess. Put this prompt in and have a look. You can delete all the examples up to 5 or put all 21 and have a look. Do you actually see any major differences or not? And so in my case, this is the result that I got from basic plus guidance. So I'm really happy, right? What you'll see here is, again, a little bit more refinement towards the theme. So, my cats here clearly looking a little bit more like they're in Japan. So we're seeing those reds, those pinks that we're used to seeing in kind of more classical Japanese artwork and blues. Our cats, again, starting to look a lot more like cats and perhaps cartoon drawn cats across all 4. So I'm really starting to see a convergence here in terms of what I'm putting in as a prompt and then the output that I'm getting. But can we do better with Few Shot, right? Like maybe there's some more tips that I can give you. And the answer is like, yeah, absolutely, there are more. So now what we want to look at doing is, well, can we be a bit more intentional with our examples? So for example, if I wanted to make a street photography prompt, well then maybe I should only give it street photography based examples. Or if you want to make slightly more generalized, like I did, curate the various different examples around specific themes or topics. Or like I said, archetypes here. And then are there other sort of constraints that we can further add to refine the model? So let's take a look. So here you go, under the curated example. What you'll see, and again, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm building. So I'm building off the Zero Shot prompt. So you'll see mostly this is the same prompt from Zero Shot, right? Then I've just kind of added below. I've shared some tips and tricks. The tips are still the same. So again, it's just this kind of notion of being additive as we go through. But now you'll see I've curated the examples. So now there are 7 archetypes that are fairly different. So like graphic design, cultural and historical, fashion and lifestyle. And then I gave it a varying degree of examples under each of those. And hopefully the idea here is then this gives ChatGPT a better sense of what we're looking for. So hopefully as it realizes a theme behind what I'm asking it to build, it has a better vocabulary or a better semantic understanding of the sort of words that it should be popping in. And when you run that, for me, honestly, I think this is probably the best result that I'd seen. But again, that's the aesthetic that appeals to me, right? So when I look at it from a Midjourney perspective, this is the one that I think was one of the top for me. But from an output perspective, what you'll kind of notice is it's good, but I don't know that it's necessarily exactly what I want. right? And I say that because, yes, we absolutely have a single, it's like fragments of sentences that we have here, right? Really what I'm looking for is a description of the subject specifically, and then a bunch of keywords kind of describing various facets of the image as they relate to that subject. So for me, this prompt is good, and I think it does yield really good results with Midjourney. But the question is, as the documentation suggested, give me a description of the subject and then keywords around that so that I can produce a better image for you. And this doesn't quite hit the mark there. It yields a great image, turns out, but again, it's not following to spec what I'm wanting to put in. And as we think about how can I use LLMs in my everyday sort of workflows, how can I use it to actually supercharge what I need to get done, having something that doesn't follow spec exactly isn't ideal, right? And so really, that kind of led me to the lab, right? Because I'm kind of curious, as I guess most like engineers or hackers are, well, how powerful are these LLMs? Really, how deep can we go? And so we're going to find out together. This next part, I think, is the most fun part. And it was driven by a question that I had, which was, well, is it possible to almost put like a coding layer on top of ChatGPT? And more specifically, could I code a function that would allow me to put some arbitrary prompt into ChatGPT, manipulate it in some way like we would with a normal function, like computer programming function, and then give me an output, right? And that output sort of being more or less consistent and repeatable, just in the same way that a computer function, every time I give it a certain set of inputs, it returns back an output in some way. Really what I'm looking at here is kind of getting a consistent output from that LLM. Remember, like I said, LLMs are not deterministic. And so the more I can sort of fine tune what I get out from it, the more effective it is at helping me with my workflows. So if we think about when I need to generate sales emails or when I'm looking to generate a tone of voice for myself, I really want something that's more consistent. I don't want to give the LLM that much creative freedom and flexibility to kind of return back a response. I still also wanted to have that degree of flexibility though, right? I mean, the whole point is something like ChatGPT is supposed to supercharge my abilities. And so how do I yield that consistency but still get those benefits of it being supercharged? It sounds pretty cool if we can do it, but like, does that even work? How would we do it? When we think of normal coding, there is a specific syntax that we need to consider depending on the language we've chosen. There's a way that we need to think about structuring data and getting an output. So like, how do we even start this all? And I guess we start at the beginning. So what is it that we want from ChatGPT? So in this instance, I want ChatGPT to give me a subject, right, based on the keywords. Tell me the artistic medium that it's going to apply to the subject to kind of visually, to create that visual link between the subject and the image. And then where is my subject? Some element of lighting, if the artistic medium needs lighting. Color, what is the sort of color palette that I want that I want Midjourney to apply to this image? And then the mood, right? Like, is there a way that maybe Midjourney can give some sort of like mood towards this? And what I'll say is I didn't come up with a structure. Again, this comes directly from the Midjourney docs, where they recommend using these sort of keywords to produce a really good looking image. So this didn't require me to be a good artist. I just needed to understand the output that I needed to curate from my prompts. Cool. So it sounds like we can more or less produce some sort of like formulaic output. The question is, what do I even do with ChatGPT? And actually, going back to what we learned from Zero Shot, I'm just going to tell ChatGPT that it's a computer function. It's as simple as that, right? So I need you to be a computer. I'm going to pass you some keywords, and I want you to give me an output. It's a little more than just that, and let's take a look at the worksheet to get a sense, but roughly, like I mentioned, right? You'll see here, you're a computer function. I'm going to pass you a set of keywords, and what you'll notice here, I didn't use square brackets. I just chose to use chevrons. It doesn't matter what you choose. I could have had double square brackets here. I just wanted to do this to show you that you can change your output. And in fact, and apologies to the coders in the room because I feel you're going to yank your hair out, but there's inconsistencies, right? Here I have chevrons. Here I have square brackets. I just did it to show you that you can. No, please don't take offense from that. OK, so now we know that it's going to get a set of keywords. And what I'm telling it is I want an output as an image description prompt. OK, again, here's another one. It's in quotation marks. So that's ultimately the output that I'm looking for. Or if we think in a classic like coding function sort of perspective, that's the return that I want back. So you'll see here, I literally coded out what I'm saying, subject plus art. So that is the output I'm expecting. And then here we just kind of used, or I used some creative flexibility. So you'll see here, I told it for the subject, base it on the keywords. For artistic medium, I thought I'd try something different. And I would just give it a bunch of options it could choose from. Oil painting, or digital painting, water landscape, or op art, cinematography, or typography. So here, this is really just me demonstrating that you can also be a bit more explicit in the choices that ChatGPT makes, or in general LLMs. They don't have to have that full extensive knowledge of what it understands to be an art medium. You can kind of constrain it a bit more. Again, using keywords, provide 3 to 5 words in the background, right? And the same for lighting medium. And then lastly, is the kind of instruction on how do I want you to give it to me. So the final output must be in the following format: the subject, followed by a list of keywords, and then I just reference back what I'm looking for. And what you'll notice when you pop that in and you give it your 3-word prompt is you get an output that more or less looks like this, right? So what's interesting? Spot on. I have a sentence for my subject. That's cool. I have keywords. So you'll see artistic medium, just a keyword. Environment, couple keywords. Lighting, couple keywords. I have an output, and honestly, I'll show you what this output looks like in a second, but not exactly what I'm looking for, right? What I'm expecting is a cute samurai cat, comma Unico art, those keywords, these keywords, these keywords. Didn't quite get that. What I have here is ChatGPT, at least, embellishing a bit more and kind of adding or creating sentences based on those keywords, right? Because it's thinking that's what I'm looking for. But you know what? It worked. I mean, we got an image, right? So this is kind of cool. This is telling us maybe it's possible for us to kind of almost put this like pseudo coding layer on top of ChatGPT that allows us to get perhaps a bit more of a consistent output coming out. But I like to overachieve. And so the question is, can we do better? Can we kind of go back to the lab and refine this perhaps even more, right? And I think even as we look back at that response, we absolutely can. Firstly, we have too many words, right? Again, we want a simple subject and keywords. Can we maybe do a better description here from an output perspective? So I really want that specific format. And maybe I can also add a level of like conditional formatting. So that's to say, if you select a something, do something else. So in this case, I'm going to give the LLM the option, or again, like ChatGPT in this case, I'm going to give it the option if it wants to use lighting or not. So I don't know. Let's see if that works. So how do we go about this? So again, what you'll see, for consistency's sake, copy and pasted the same first couple lines. But now we do a little bit more. So when we look at the subject, the subject needs to describe the subject, but does not need to use every keyword. So what I'm hoping there is, for example, if I use the color pink, ChatGPT will not use pink in the subject. It'll decide that that doesn't make sense in the context of the subject it's providing, and we'll still reference it elsewhere in its output, but not directly in the subject. Again, I've been a bit more explicit, so provide 3 to 5 words on the background. And what's important here is I'm telling it, it does not need to be grammatically correct, right? And I've really kind of used that consistently throughout the rest of the prompt so that I kind of force it a bit more to be okay with just giving an output of keywords. Artistic medium is left the same. Lighting, again, is interesting, right? So here we go. If the selected environment needs lighting conditions, then add them. So again, hopefully this means that in a couple of the responses that we use, that lighting keyword might not come up at all, right? Again, we're just giving it the choice to use it or not use it. And then I did a bit more cleaning up on the output. So what's cool or what's interesting here is I've now given output as its own sort of variable title. I've asked it to provide it as a code snippet for markup, which does work. That was super cool. That does work. And then again, I've kind of hammered home again this notion of it does not need to be grammatically correct. And then just reiterated, this is the third time I'm reiterating the structure that I want. And check it out. Actually, the response is pretty good. So again, got my subject, awesome. My environment is there. Lighting happened to be in this one, but if you kind of hit regenerate, you should see it does drop it. Not as often as I'd like, but it does drop it. And then the output is in the form of a code snippet. So again, I'm not going to show you what it looks like in ChatGPT, but for those of you following along, hopefully you do see that. All right, and so I think overall, this looks like a great image, and I'm really happy with how these outputs are starting to be a little bit more consistent and a lot more controllable. Although one thing I was noticing as I was doing more and more of these examples was, my outputs kept converging towards a specific style. And so that I don't butcher it, I'm referring to the ukiyo-e style here, right? So that's really this kind of like specific Japanese art period. And I'm kind of curious, could I kind of maybe break outside of that? So like I said, I want a consistent output, but at the same time, I still want a degree of creativeness coming from ChatGPT. I think that's a result of it associating samurai a little bit too closely with the ukiyo-e artistic style. So can we kind of change that? At the same time, what about, can we kind of maybe use some of the other techniques from zero shot and few shot to make this function even more powerful? And so that led me to the lab, right? And like I said, let's have a look. Can we combine what we've already learned in the session to the function? And then can we also drop this high dependency or correlation between our ukiyo-e theme and the output of a cute samurai cat? So, let's have a look. Firstly, I didn't do it here, but in terms of what I actually prompted from ChatGPT, I removed the ukiyo-e art type. And actually, this is a really good thing, right? When we started the session, the question was, could we get ChatGPT to be more deterministic than when we started? Yeah, well, at this point, we've shown that we can get it so deterministic that I can just delete a single keyword and kind of know that I'm going to get a different output. And I think that's something that's really interesting to note here, because you're not going to get that as easily from zero or few shot prompting. That's going to take a lot more work. And really, that's the control we want as we start to use these LLM tools to mass produce emails, to help us with our spreadsheets, to make us just more productive in our general work. The other thing that you'll notice here is the way that these examples were created. So this is pretty meta, but I used ChatGPT to create 6 highly differentiated examples that I was going to feed back into it. So hold on to your seatbelts, but ChatGPT helped me build refinements that I could feed back into ChatGPT so that I could improve my output of what I was looking for. Yes, I just said that out loud. Yes, it worked, and it is super, super awesome that we can play around with that. So these outputs were generated directly from ChatGPT. So you'll see here, it understood the way that I'd given it the prompt, keywords, and it gave me the keywords, and then generated the output as if it was the query of those 4 words into ChatGPT, and then provided an output, which again is exactly what I was looking for. So just the sentence, and then a list of my keywords following that. It's also really interesting because, again, like I said, these are really different. You know, I've got a ocean ship, I've got outer space, I've got a dancer, I've got an animal, I even have like a castle sort of landscape. So really nice in terms of the types of examples that ChatGPT gave me to feed back into ChatGPT. And that's mostly it, right? So removing the things that we don't want from the top, using some of the examples. And yeah, you know, I got more example sets, this time outside of that core theme that I'd kind of seen that repetition around. I think these are objectively very cute looking cats. But again, honestly, it's more about the outputs, right? So we modified what we were expecting from ChatGPT. So here you'll see the artistic medium that I chose was not ukiyo-e, but instead anime portrait. Okay, might not have been what I wanted, but again, I've shown a level of control that I can edit and manipulate this, which is exactly what we wanted. And so I guess where to next? Well, you've got access to the working doc. You've got access to the presentation. Play around with this. Fork the models, iterate on them, share back with us wherever this is posted, or if you start a group or whatever. You know, kind of let's build on this collective knowledge. If you want, try and modify this with examples for your own. So as I mentioned earlier, if you really like street photography, see what happens when you just do 5 or 6 really good street photography examples. Does that give you the output more of what you're looking towards? And again, maybe even Midjourney doesn't produce that, but if ChatGPT is converging more towards a sort of language that you would expect to describe street photography, that's what you're looking for, right? Again, we want to know that we can control the LLMs a bit better, and that, you know, given an input, it's going to modify it the way I expect it to modify it and give me an output that's more deterministic, more repeatable, and more useful in those kind of day-to-day situations where I'm really looking to introduce automation in my life. And then lastly, try the other models, right? So Stable Diffusion is another library that allows you to create images. DALL-E 2 is another one from OpenAI. Adobe has Firefly. Try the different image-based tools. See what happens when you put the prompt in these different engines and what sort of result that yields. Or try different like text-based LLMs. Try something like Bard or Bing Chat or any of the other models hosted on Hugging Face. What I will say though, why I didn't use Bard or Bing Chat, they didn't at the time of this recording have a way to kind of maintain a persistent conversation. And so actually trying to get it to produce a prompt output was a little tricky. You can do it, but it just wasn't as easy as I thought. So that's where we ended up. Thank you for the time. I hope you found this useful. And please share feedback with us so that we know how we can improve sessions like this going forward. And have fun creating all the stuff out there. Thank you.